Oh, no, you go ahead. I was going to ask you, I think perhaps the people would be interested in knowing the main problem really was relief that you wanted to do something about. Could you sort of give a description of how relief was dispensed then and what you tried to do?
We came in that year, and of course we had a lot of people on relief. One of the saddening things was that as we went into the city hall, there was people lined up from the top floor of the city hall, the second floor of the city hall, down to the library steps. And these were mostly mothers and small children waiting in line to get vouchers for food and the necessities of life. They would stand there sometimes for maybe 2 or 3 hours. They would receive a yellow voucher, and this yellow voucher, it itemized the items of food that they could get, but they had to go to the store that we sent them to. It was what was called a closed voucher. They couldn't go and get this food anywhere they liked. They had to go to a designated store. We had 42 stores in the city at that time. These were grocery stores. You know, we had no supermarkets or anything of that kind. We had independent grocers. And these people would stand for 2.5 hours, and maybe if they lived over where I lived on Arthur Avenue, they might have to go away over the bridge in Wilson Avenue to get their order filled.
Can I just interrupt there for a minute? The idea was you wanted to divide the business among the 42 merchants,
That's
or the
right.
council had. So they gave vouchers to somebody, and they'd say, well, all right, you live on Elgin Street, but this voucher's for a grocery down on Ross Street,
right?
Or Woodworth Avenue, for instance, and that woman would have to walk all the way down there and hand in her voucher and get the groceries.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was the general idea, that because of the depressed times, we tried to divide the business up around the 42 grocers. And this worked fine. But, however, there was always the element of greed crept into the picture. There would be 1 or 2 grocers who would always charge a little more than the other fellow.
They'd charge 6 cents for sugar, and the others would be 5.
He would tag on 5 cents or 6 cents on 1 or 2 items. And this, of course, created quite a problem. In fact, it created a bit of dissension among our people on relief. So I was chairman of relief, and I had to call these 42 grocers together every month. And we had a man by the name of Jones who belonged to the National Grocers, who had been established in those days. The National Grocers, he was the manager of the National Grocers.
That was really a wholesale firm that supplied all the grocers in St. Thomas, and it had its warehouse here.
That's right.
Didn't it? Yeah.
That was in the wholesale business.
Yeah.
But Jones would sit down, and I would sit down as chairman, and we'd set up the prices. We'd set up the prices of every item. And this worked out very well. As long as we had that closed voucher, we had to establish prices so that there was an equitable price to everybody around.
Well, can you tell me something? You established the prices. Now, you also wanted to get rid of that closed voucher thing.
Yes, we felt that if there was an open voucher, that most of the women could go to the different places and shop and stretch their relief dollar. And this is what we did eventually. We went to an open voucher, and that put all the grocery people on a competitive basis. And they had to treat these people with courtesy. They had to treat these people fairly. And so we get out of that problem.
With the open voucher, what you did is gave them money.
No, we give them the voucher.
Still the voucher. Didn't give them any cash.
Give them any cash. No.
And I think we've been talking about women and children here, and especially women doing the shopping and waiting in line to get their vouchers and so on. Now, what about the men? Now, what did you try to have them do?
Well, the big thing about relief in those days compared to the welfare that we have today, we made every able-bodied man work out his relief. He had to go to work. In the winter, in a day like this, he would shovel snow. But he would only work according to the amount of money that we gave him, and that was based on the prevailing wages of that time, so that he might work 2 or 3 days a week to work out his relief. And I ran into many people who were on relief in those days, and they say to me very proudly, yes, I was on relief in the 30s, but I worked for every nickel I got. Yeah. So in making these people work, they retained their dignity, and they could hold their head high. Today, you see, we give welfare out. It's been an established practice that you give welfare to everybody. And there was 3 things in the old relief system which I think should be in this system. We should make people work for what they get. There was a residential ruling. You had to be in the city for 1 year before you could establish the right to get relief. And the other one was, what was the other one? There was 3. There was there was the work, the residential ruling, and the chargeback. There was a chargeback. You see, what happened in those days, in the rural areas particularly, they didn't grant the same amount of relief that we in the cities. Of course, this was natural, because in the rural areas, they didn't have the amenities of life that we had in the cities. So what happened was that they got very, very little relief in the rural communities. So they would put a family on a truck and send them into the city.
Now tell me, Pete, just how they arranged this. So say I'm living out in Southwold, and I got a couple families on relief, and we don't have much in the Southwold Council. So you load a couple of families up in the truck, you bring them into St. Thomas to City Hall, and now why did you have to give them anything?
Well, we didn't have to give them anything, because they were supposed to be here for 1 year to establish a right. However, in order to cope with this situation, I was chairman of welfare and relief in those days, and I said, look, we are not going to treat these people like cattle. We're not going to put them on trucks. The city at that time was going to send them back on a truck. And I said, no way are we going to do this. We're going to give these people everything that we can, and we are going to charge it back to the municipality, to the township where they came from. Yeah. So, of course, I had battles with some of the Reeves. They came into St. Thomas and said, what are you doing? What are you doing? I said, we're going to give these people everything, and you're going to pay for it. And under the chargeback system at that time, they had to do it.
Yeah. Pete, that's very interesting, and I think perhaps we should remind the viewers again of how severe the economic conditions were in the 1930s, and that there are hundreds of very, very respectable St. Thomas families today who were on relief in the 1930s, and because there were no jobs. You couldn't get jobs. Now, this relief, I think what you did in St. Thomas with that 33 and 34 council is very admirable. There was one big problem that you fought very strong for, that the relief covered the married people, but the single man wasn't eligible for relief of any kind.
That's right. The single man was granted no relief. And the unfortunate problem was created that in a family where there's 2 or 3 smaller children, there was only a limited amount of money given. But maybe there were 2 older sons who were able-bodied. They couldn't get any relief, so they had to be at home, and they had to eat with their family and use the little bit of food that the family got.
Pete, is this why so many young men, young single men in the Depression, rather than stay at home and eat that food that came in relief, it was for the mother, and the young children would take off and travel abroad and travel around the country and beg and try to earn $1 here or $1 there, because really they did it rather than eating up the food that the younger children needed.
This is right. Yeah. This is exactly what happened. Young people took to the road, they took to the highways, and they took to the railroads. They rode the rails on the tracks. They were killed. Thousands of them were killed on the railroads across this country. They were killed on our highways. And they slept in jails.
Pete, I want to talk about, can you explain how the sleeping in jail setup happened in St. Thomas?
Well, we had what they called transients in those days. They were the people who moved from one place to another. These were the single-bodied young men who couldn't get relief. And we set up a municipal kitchen in the City Hall in St. Thomas, and we provided meals. A young fellow would come in on a winter night like tonight, and we would give him his supper. He would go into the back end of the police cells. We had a wire stretched across there, and they would sleep. And many a time I've been in that place. You go in there, the stench of human bodies, men who hadn't been washed for months, sleeping in their clothes, and maybe clothes that was wet if it was a rainy or stormy night. No place to dry their clothes. They came in and lay down and had a fitful night's rest.
And then you give them breakfast in the morning?
Then they got up in the morning, we'd give them their breakfast, and we'd say, get. And we'd even had occasions where the police had to take them to the edge of the city, escort them to the edge of the city, and tell them to go on. Now,
must have been a terrible time, Pete, for when you kind of consider the human dignity of the individual.
Right.
Here you are, you're a young man.
Yes.
You can't get work. You'll do anything to earn $1. You have to eat, so you tramp from Aylmer up to St. Thomas. You get a supper at St. Thomas. You get a night's sleep in the back of the jail. You have breakfast in the morning, and then they say on your way, so then they go to next town or next city, hitchhike or ride the railway, and they'd have a sort of circuit, eh?
They had a circuit. They couldn't come back within the 30 days. They couldn't come back within that month.
Yeah.
You know, there was dentists, there was lawyers, there was school teachers, there was rolling mill men, all kinds of men who were transients in those days, couldn't get work. And they came into the municipal kitchens to get a bite to eat. You know, in some of these, in the rural centers, they would make them chop wood, and chop wood particularly, and make them earn even their supper. We didn't do this because we gave them their supper and their breakfast.